The flames had been dancing for 20 minutes when Marshal Jake Thornton heard the voice behind him. "She's not dead." He spun around, hand instinctively moving to his holster. A boy, couldn't be more than 8, stood at the edge of the firelight, his clothes torn and soot-stained, his face streaked with tears and ash. The child's eyes reflected the orange glow like twin mirrors of hell. "Son, where did you—" "She's not dead," the boy repeated, his voice steady despite the trembling in his small frame. Then he raised one dirt-crusted finger and pointed directly at the burning cabin. "She's in there." Jake's blood turned to ice water. The widow Morrison's place had been ablaze when he'd arrived, drawn by the smoke column visible from 3 miles out. He'd circled the structure twice, calling out, hearing nothing but the hungry roar of flames consuming timber and memory. The heat had driven him back each time he'd tried to get closer to the door. Now this boy, this ghost of a child, was telling him someone was still inside. "What's your name, son?" Jake knelt down, trying to keep his voice calm while his mind raced. The roof would collapse any minute. If someone was truly in there. "Tommy." The boy's gaze never left the burning structure. "Tommy Morrison. That's my man there, and she's not dead." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. Sarah Morrison had a son. He'd heard talk in town, but no one had seen the boy in months. Folks said she'd sent him east to live with relatives after her husband died in the mine collapse. Yet here he stood, materializing out of the smoke and shadow like some fever dream. "Tommy, how do you know she's—" "Because she was breathing when I left her." The boy's words cut through the night air like a blade. "I hid like she told me, in the root cellar, but I could hear her breathing through the floor." The cabin's front wall suddenly buckled, sending a shower of sparks into the darkness. Jake calculated the time, maybe 5 minutes before the whole structure came down, maybe less. "When did you leave the cellar, Tommy?" "Just now. When I heard your horse." The boy finally looked at him, and Jake saw something in those young eyes that made his skin crawl, a certainty that belonged to someone much older. "You're going in after her, aren't you, Marshal?" Jake stared at the inferno, knowing that entering meant probable death, knowing that not entering meant certain damnation. Jake pulled off his hat, running fingers through sweat-dampened hair. Every instinct screamed that the cabin was a death trap. The support beams were compromised, the heat intense enough to kill a man in seconds, but the boy's unwavering stare burned hotter than the flames. "Tommy, I need you to understand something. If your ma's been in there this long, she's alive." The boy stepped closer, his small hand suddenly gripping Jake's sleeve with surprising strength. "I can feel it, the way she used to feel when I had nightmares. She's calling for help, but you can't hear her over the fire." Jake had seen enough death to recognize the desperate hope of grief. Children created stories to survive unbearable truths. But something in Tommy's voice, a quiet knowing that raised the hair on Jake's neck, made him hesitate. "Where exactly was she when you last saw her?" "Back bedroom. She pushed the dresser against the door when the men came. Told me to run to the cellar and not come out till morning." Tommy's grip tightened. "But morning's here, and she needs help moving the dresser." "What men, son?" Before Tommy could answer, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the prairie. Jake counted 3 riders, maybe 4, coming fast from the direction of town. The boy immediately stepped behind him, small body pressing against his legs. "Don't let them see me," Tommy whispered urgently. "They think I'm dead too." The riders emerged from the darkness, Mayor Caldwell, Doc Peterson, and 2 men Jake didn't recognize. They pulled up short, horses dancing nervously in the firelight. "Marshal," Caldwell called out, dismounting with obvious relief. "Thank God you're here. We saw the smoke from town. Terrible business about the widow Morrison. You seen the body?" Jake asked carefully, not taking his eyes off the mayor's face. "Well, no, but..." Caldwell gestured helplessly at the blaze. "Nobody could survive that. Poor woman. At least her boy wasn't here. Heard he went east months ago." Jake felt Tommy press closer against his legs, the child's presence hidden by shadows and the marshal's long coat. One of the strangers spoke up, a lean man with cold eyes and expensive boots. "Shame about the fire. These old cabins go up so fast, especially when folks leave lanterns burning." His voice carried an odd satisfaction. "Course accidents happen." The word accidents hung in the smoky air like a challenge. Jake's hand drifted toward his gun, and he saw the stranger notice the movement. Tommy's grip on his leg tightened to the point of pain. "Funny thing," Jake said slowly. "I was just about to check inside. Make sure nobody's trapped." The stranger's smile never wavered. "I wouldn't, Marshal. That roof's about to come down. Wouldn't want the town to lose its lawman over something already settled." The stranger's words carried the weight of a threat wrapped in concern. Jake felt the subtle shift in the group's positioning. Doc Peterson backing his horse away. Mayor Caldwell's nervous glance between the marshal and the two men he'd brought along. The second stranger, silent until now, let his coat fall open just enough to reveal a gun belt worn smooth with use. "Seems like a lot of folks rode out here mighty quick for a simple house fire," Jake observed, his voice deceptively casual. Behind him Tommy remained perfectly still, but the boy's breathing had quickened. "News travels fast in small towns," the first stranger replied. "Especially bad news. Name's Garrett, by the way. This here's my partner, Lynch. We represent certain business interests in the territory." Jake had heard those names whispered in saloons, men who solved problems for people with enough money to pay, the kind of problems that often ended in fires and funerals. What kind of business interests would those be? Garrett's smile widened, showing teeth stained yellow by tobacco. "The kind that requires clear land titles. The Morrison property sits on some valuable water rights. Shame the widow was so stubborn about selling." The cabin's back wall suddenly groaned and tilted inward, sending up a fresh column of sparks. Jake felt Tommy flinch against his leg, and for a heart-stopping moment, he thought he heard something, a cry maybe, or just the sound of burning timber. Course Lynch spoke for the first time, his voice like gravel. "Once the county declares her dead, those rights'll go to auction. Public bidding, fair and square. Mighty convenient," Jake said. "Her dying right when someone needs her land." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Doc Peterson's horse sidled nervously, sensing the danger its rider seemed oblivious to. Mayor Caldwell cleared his throat diplomatically. "Marshal, perhaps we should head back to town. Let the fire burn itself out naturally. Nothing more we can do here." "Actually there is." Jake took a deliberate step toward the cabin. "I'm going inside to check for survivors." "I really wouldn't recommend that," Garrett said, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Dangerous business playing hero. Sometimes heroes don't make it home." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jake calculated odds. 2 professional killers, a nervous mayor, and a doctor who'd probably never drawn a weapon in his life. Tommy pressed closer, and Jake felt the boy's small body trembling with more than just fear. "She's still breathing," Tommy whispered, his voice so quiet only Jake could hear. But not for long. Jake looked at the burning cabin, then at the assembled men. The flames cast dancing shadows on their faces, making it impossible to read true intentions. But Garrett's smile never wavered, and Lynch's hand never moved far from his weapon. The roof beam cracked with a sound like thunder, and everyone's eyes turned skyward. When they looked back, Jake was already moving toward the cabin door, Tommy's desperate whisper echoing in his ears. "Please, Marshal, don't let them win." Jake reached the cabin's front door and felt the heat slam into him like a physical blow. Through the flames, he could make out the narrow hallway leading to the back bedrooms. The smoke was thick enough to choke on, but beneath the acrid smell of burning wood, he caught something else, the faint scent of lavender soap. Sarah Morrison's scent. "You're making a mistake, Marshal," Garrett called out behind him. "That building's coming down any second." Jake ignored him, pulling his bandana up over his nose and mouth. He was about to plunge into the inferno when he felt a small hand slip into his. Tommy had stepped out from behind him, no longer hiding from the men. His young face was set with determination that belonged on someone 3 times his age. "I'm coming with you," the boy said simply. Like hell you are. Jake knelt down, gripping Tommy's shoulders. You stay right here, you understand? She won't come for you, she doesn't know you. Tommy's eyes glistened with unshed tears. But she'll come for me. She always comes when I call. Before Jake could stop him, Tommy pulled free and darted toward the burning doorway. The marshal lunged after him, catching the boy around the waist just as they both crossed the threshold into hell. The heat was unbearable. Jake's eyes streamed tears, and his lungs burned with each breath. But Tommy seemed to know exactly where he was going, tugging Jake toward the back of the cabin with surprising strength. "Ma," the boy called out. "Ma, it's Tommy. I brought help." They reached a closed door, and Jake could see the dresser pushed against it from the inside, just as Tommy had described. He put his shoulder to the wood and heaved, feeling it give slightly. Then from the other side came the sound he'd been praying to hear, a weak cough, followed by a voice barely above a whisper. "Tommy, baby, is that you?" "It's me, Ma. I'm here." Tears streamed down the boy's soot-stained cheeks. "I brought the marshal. We're gonna get you out." Jake threw his weight against the door again, and this time it opened enough for him to squeeze through. Sarah Morrison lay on the floor beside an overturned water basin, her dress singed and her face pale from smoke inhalation, but very much alive. She'd soaked blankets and clothing to create a barrier against the flames, buying herself precious time. "I knew you'd come back," she whispered to Tommy, reaching out with a trembling hand to touch his face. "I knew you wouldn't leave me." "Never," Tommy said fiercely. "I'll never leave you." Jake lifted Sarah in his arms, amazed at how light she felt. "We need to move now. The whole place is about to come down." As they made their way back through the burning cabin, Sarah's head resting against Jake's shoulder, he heard her whisper something that made his blood run cold. "They thought we were both dead. That was their mistake." Jake burst through the cabin door with Sarah in his arms, Tommy close beside him, just as the roof beam gave way with a thunderous crash. The assembled men stared in shock. Garrett and Lynch's faces twisted with rage, while Doc Peterson and Mayor Caldwell rushed forward to help. "Impossible," Lynch snarled, his hand moving to his gun. "Nobody could have survived that long." "Funny thing about impossible," Jake said, gently setting Sarah down as Doc Peterson began checking her for injuries. "Sometimes it just means folks didn't try hard enough." Garrett's face had gone white with fury. "This doesn't change anything, Marshal. Accidents still happen. House fires, shootings, all kinds of unfortunate events. You threatening a lawman?" Jake's voice carried deadly quiet. "Just stating facts." Garrett's hand hovered over his weapon. "Widow's got no proof of anything except her house burned down. Our word against hers." That's when Sarah Morrison spoke, her voice weak but clear as church bells. "Mayor Caldwell, I believe you'll find a tin box buried under the oak tree behind what used to be my chicken coop. Inside that box are documents showing how Mr. Garrett here offered to buy my land for half its value. When I refused, he said accidents had a way of changing stubborn minds." Garrett's face flushed red. "You can't prove." "The box also contains a letter detailing his threats witnessed and signed by Doc Peterson here, who treated my husband after Garrett's men accidentally caused the mine collapse that killed him." Doc Peterson's face went ashen. "Sarah, I was afraid. They said they'd hurt my family if I spoke up. Fear makes cowards of us all, Doc. But truth has a way of surfacing, like bodies in a river." Lynch's hand moved toward his gun, but Jake was faster. His Colt cleared leather with practiced ease, the barrel trained on Lynch's chest before the killer could complete his draw. "I wouldn't," Jake said softly. "Town's got enough graves already." Mayor Caldwell found his voice at last. "Garrett Lynch, I think you'd better leave our territory tonight, and don't come back." "This ain't over," Garrett spat, but he was already backing toward his horse. "Yes," Sarah said, pulling Tommy close against her side. "It is." Jake kept his gun trained on the two men until they'd mounted and ridden away, disappearing into the darkness from which they'd emerged. Only then did he holster his weapon and turn back to Sarah and Tommy. "How did you know?" he asked. about the boy being alive, about her surviving. Sarah smiled, her arm tight around her son. Tommy and we've always had a connection. When his father died, I sent him to stay with my sister for his safety. But tonight when those men came, I could feel him coming home, could feel him calling to me through the flames. Tommy looked up at Jake with those knowing eyes. Some folks got a bond that fire can't break. Death can't break it either. 3 months later, Jake rode past the site where the Morrison cabin once stood. In its place rose the frame of a new house, larger and stronger than the old one. Sarah Morrison had used the reward money from Garrett and Lynch's capture. They'd made the mistake of robbing a bank in the next county to rebuild not just her home but her life. Tommy waved from where he sat on the porch steps, no longer the ghostly child who'd emerged from smoke and shadow, but a boy with color in his cheeks and laughter in his voice. Sarah appeared in the doorway, flower on her apron, looking like a woman who'd found peace after a long war. Jake touched the brim of his hat and rode on, thinking about bonds that couldn't be broken, and the way love sometimes masqueraded as impossible things. Behind him, the sound of Tommy's laughter carried on the wind, bright and alive as morning sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Some stories, Jake reflected, were worth riding into the fire for.